My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "This cabin is under my parents' name now." She expected me to argue. She expected me to panic. Instead, I smiled and said nothing. A week later, her parents arrived with a moving van, convinced they were about to move into their new vacation home. But the moment they reached the front entrance, they stopped cold. Whatever they expected to find behind that door, it wasn't what was waiting for them. She said it in my own kitchen, 2 days after Thanksgiving, with her coat still on and her car keys still in her hand, like she was delivering a package and didn't plan to stay for the signature. I was at the sink, rinsing the roasting pan I'd lent them for the holiday. My son had carried it in and set it on the counter and said it smelled like Thanksgiving in here, which it did, because I'd made turkey soup from the carcass the way my wife used to. He was reaching for a coffee mug when his wife put her hand flat on my counter, looked me in the eye, and told me the cabin was under her parents' name now. The paperwork had gone through. It was recorded with the county. It was, she said, already done. She had rehearsed it. The sentences came out coupled together like cars on a train. It's done. It's recorded. You'll still be welcome up there, of course. Her parents were thinking the second weekend of December for the move. And really, wasn't this the best thing for everyone? I turned off the water. I dried my hands on the towel hanging from the oven door, the one with the embroidered loons that my wife bought the year before she died, and I looked at my daughter-in-law for a long moment. She was watching me the way you watch a vending machine after you've put your money in, waiting for the thing she'd paid for, the argument, the shouting maybe, the panic, the demand to see documents, the old man sputtering about lawyers while she stood there calm and sorry not sorry. She had answers loaded for all of it. I could see them stacked up behind her eyes like dishes in a rack. My son stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, holding a coffee mug he never filled, and said nothing. That was the part that actually hurt, not her sentence, his silence underneath it. So I smiled, and I said nothing at all. I just hung the towel back on the oven door and went back to the pan. It rattled her, just for a second. People like my daughter-in-law carry a model of you around in their heads, and they steer by the model, not by you. Her model of me said, he will argue, lose, and fold in that order. Silence wasn't in the model. She recovered fast, said someone would be in touch about logistics. She actually used that word, logistics. And then she steered my son out the door with a flat hand on his back, the way you steer a shopping cart. I stood in my kitchen and listened to their car pull out of the driveway, and I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't rage and it wasn't fear. It was something dangerously close to relief, because here is what my daughter-in-law did not know, standing in my kitchen with her keys in her hand and the whole thing already done. I had known about that deed for a month. I had spent that month doing something about it, and the only thing her announcement changed was the line I wrote in my log that evening, the date, the time, and the exact words she used when she said it to my face. I should tell you who I am because it matters to how all of this went. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for the county. Bridges, box culverts, retaining walls, load ratings on overpasses you have driven across 1,000 times without once thinking about them, which is the point. If I did my job right, you never thought about me at all. The work was math and mud and paperwork in roughly equal parts, and I loved it in the unglamorous way you love anything you're built for. A career like that rearranges your head. You stop believing in arguments and start believing in numbers. People can talk all day about what a beam should hold. The beam doesn't attend the meeting. Concrete doesn't care how sincere you are. A well doesn't care who your father was. A thing either carries the load or it doesn't, and there is no partial credit. I have watched men with beautiful voices lose to a gauge reading more times than I can count. My wife used to say I inspected everything. The car, the gutters, the turkey, her sentences. She said it with love, mostly. She was a school librarian for 29 years, the kind who knew which quiet kid needed which loud book, and we were married 36 years. Somewhere around 1994, she tore a photograph out of a magazine in a dentist's waiting room, a little cabin on a lake, fog on the water, a coffee cup on a porch rail, and she kept it folded in the recipe box behind the card for her mother's pot roast. Someday, she wrote on it, in pencil, in that small, neat hand. We used to take it out maybe once a year and look at it and put it back. She got sick 7 years ago. It was 14 months from the scan to the end, and I am not going to walk you through those months except to say that I held her hand in a recliner that the insurance paid for in our living room, and the last full sentence she ever said to me was about whether I'd remembered to shut the damper. I had. She smiled about it. I kept working 2 more years after that because the quiet at the office was survivable and the quiet at home was not. I retired at 62 with a pension, a paid-off little house in town, and a savings account I had been quietly feeding for over a decade. Every emergency call out at 2 in the morning after a flood, every holiday rate, every bridge inspection in freezing rain went into that account. $290,000 in change sitting there, waiting for me to figure out what the rest of my life was for. The photograph in the recipe box already knew. I found the listing on a Tuesday in March 2 years ago and drove up the same afternoon with the truck heater roaring and her photograph on the passenger seat like a co-pilot. It was 40 minutes north of town, down an access road that needed grading. 1.3 acres, 180 feet of lake frontage, 2 bedrooms and a loft, a wood stove with a soapstone top, and a covered porch facing west across the water, built in 1987 by a dentist who had kept it the way you keep something you respect. When I walked out onto that porch and looked at the lake, I'm not ashamed to tell you I had to hold the rail for a second. I offered $284,000 $1,500 cash. No mortgage, no cosigner, no contingencies, no compromise. We closed on the 19th of April in a title office with bad coffee and good people, and I signed my name more times in 1 hour than I had in the previous 5 years. At the end of it, the title officer squared the stack of papers and gave me one piece of advice I didn't ask for. She said they were seeing more deed fraud every year, especially against older owners with paid-off property. Somebody records a forged document against your land, and you don't find out until it's too late to be simple. The county ran a free fraud alert program, she said. You register your parcel, and if anything is ever recorded against it, the system notifies you. Takes 2 minutes. I was a man who had spent 3 decades filing inspection reports nobody read until something failed. Of course I signed up. I did it right there at her desk, on her computer, before the ink on the deed was dry. She printed a confirmation page and I put it in the closing folder, and I will be honest with you, I forgot about it completely, the way you forget a smoke detector. That first night I lit the wood stove and slept on an air mattress in the empty living room, and at 5:10 the next morning, I took a cup of coffee out onto the porch in the cold and listened to loons somewhere out in the dark, and I talked to my wife out loud for the first time since the funeral. Nothing long, just, we made it, hun. Then the sky came up gray, and then silver off the water, and I sat there until the cup went cold in my hands. My son brought his family up that June. I grilled steaks on the porch, and my grandsons, 7 and 4, spent 2 hours throwing rocks into the lake with total commitment, the way only boys that age can. My son leaned back in a porch chair with a beer and went quiet in the good way, the loose-shouldered way, and told me the place suited me. It was one of the best evenings I'd had in years. My daughter-in-law walked through every room twice. I noticed it and said nothing. She opened closets. She stood in the loft for a while, measuring something with her eyes. When she came back out to the porch, she said it was smaller than she expected. Later, looking out at the water with her wine, she said almost to herself, all this for one person. It's exactly enough for one person, I said. She smiled at something past my shoulder and didn't answer. My son is 36. He's a project manager for a builder, good at his work, steady with his boys, and allergic to conflict in a way that has worried me since he was 9 years old. He was the kid who would rather absorb a wrong than name one. His mother could draw him out of it. She had a way of asking him one quiet question at the right moment. I never learned the trick. I'm an engineer. I kept thinking the problem would resolve under load. He met his wife 9 years ago at a friend's wedding, and I will say this plainly because it's true. She is impressive, quick, organized, charming at full wattage when there's something on the other side of you that she wants. She got her real estate license 5 years ago and she's good at it. Top producer plaques, the personalized sign panels, the whole kit. Before that, she spent 4 years working the front desk of a title company, processing closings, shepherding documents to the county recorder. At the time, I thought of it as a detail. It turned out to be the single most important fact in this entire story. The pattern showed itself early, in small denominations. The first year they were married, my son asked to borrow my truck for one weekend to move a couch. It came back 19 days later with a cracked taillight and a quarter tank, and nobody mentioned either. Thanksgiving officially rotated between households, but somehow the rotation always landed where she'd already decided it should. And the word family, I started noticing what that word was doing in her sentences. We're family was never the beginning of an offer. It was the beginning of a request. The transfers it introduced only ever ran in one direction. Small things. You let small things go. I did for years on a policy I'd held since my son got married. You don't get to inspect your kid's marriage. You're not the engineer of record on that structure. You just keep the porch light on. So I watched my son get a little quieter every year, and I told myself that quiet was contentment, because the alternative required a conversation I didn't know how to start. The boys came, first one, then the other, and they are, the two best arguments for the whole arrangement. I held my policy. I kept the porch light on. I want to be fair to her even now. I don't believe she sat down one day and decided to become what she became. I think she was a person who had always been able to close, and closing had always been rewarded, and somewhere along the line, the difference between what's mine and what's available stopped being visible to her. I've seen the same thing happen in concrete. Nothing dramatic, just water finding the one place you didn't seal year after year until the rebar's gone and the surface still looks fine. The campaign started in September, on the phone, in her brightest voice. Her parents had come up with them for a weekend in August, and I want this on the record. I liked them. Her father drove a propane delivery route for 34 years and has the handshake to prove it. Her mother kept the books for a dental office and laughed at my worst jokes. Decent, unglamorous people who raised a daughter who learned to want more than they had. Her father stood on my dock for a long time that visit, looking at the water the way I look at it. So when she called in September, she had her opening. Her parents had fallen in love with the lake, she said, and since I barely used the cabin in the cold months, her words, wouldn't it make sense for them to do winters up there? They'd look after it. It would be good for everyone. I do use it in the cold months, I told her. Winter is my favorite season up there. The answer is no, but they're welcome to visit any time. A pause, one beat too long, then brightness again, and we talked about the boys, and she got off the phone. October was the trust. She emailed me a PDF her cousin had drafted. The cousin does wealth planning, she said. Everybody our age is doing this for their parents. Proposing I move the cabin into a family trust, for tax reasons, for protection. She had already had him start the paperwork, which is a sentence I have turned over many times since. I read all 11 pages at my kitchen table with a pencil, the way I used to read soils reports, and on page 6, I found the load path. Trustee, her. Successor trustee, her cousin. My name appeared as what the document called the settler, which is the legal term for the person who furnishes the asset and then gets thanked for it. I declined in writing. One paragraph, polite, unambiguous. I appreciate the thought. The cabin will remain titled solely in my name. This isn't a subject I'm interested in revisiting. Her reply came 4 hours later, and it was one sentence long. You're not going to live forever, you know. I sat with that sentence for a while. Then I filed the email in a folder because 31 years of habit said file it, and I told myself the matter was closed. October went quiet. November started quiet. No calls, no proposals, no brightness. 2 whole weeks of nothing, and I mistook the nothing for the end of it. 31 years of engineering, and I still made the oldest mistake in the book. I assumed that because the front door held, nobody would try a window. I had told her no at every door, so she stopped using doors. The letter came on a Tuesday at the end of October in a windowed envelope from the county recorder's office, mixed in with a seed catalog and the power bill. I almost didn't open it that day. I want you to understand how thin the margin was. It sat on the counter for an hour while I cleaned gutters, and I opened it standing up with thumb grit on the paper, expecting a fee notice. Notice of recorded document, it said across the top. My parcel number. Document type, quitclaim deed. Recording date, October the 14th, 9:32 a.m. Grantor, my name. Grantees, 2 names I knew. Her father, her mother. A photocopy of the deed itself was folded behind the notice. I unfolded it, and there, at the bottom, above a notary stamp, was my signature. It was a good signature. Confident. The right slant, the right loop, the right impatient little tail on the last letter. Mine, except that I never wrote it. The document was dated October the 11th, and I didn't need to check the calendar to know where I'd been on October the 11th, but I checked anyway, because that's what I do. Retired engineer's lunch. 26 of us at a long table. I still had the receipt for a club sandwich and an iced tea, 1461, time-stamped 12:48 p.m. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I stayed there for most of an hour. I can tell you exactly what that hour was like, because I inventoried it the way I'd inventory damage. My ears rang, faintly, like after a long day around equipment. The paper sounded very loud every time it moved. I read the deed maybe 9 times, and each time my eyes snagged on the same word, grantor, 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 a word that means the man who gives this away freely. And I will be honest about the impulses in the order they arrived. First, call my son. Second, call her at volume. Third, drive to their house with the deed in my fist and put it on their kitchen counter, the way she would later put her hand on mine. Every one of those impulses had the same shape, noise, fast, and I sat there until they passed, because a voice I'd been training for 3 decades finally got the floor. When a structure is failing, you don't shout at it, you measure it. Later that evening, I found the fraud alert email too, the one the county system had sent automatically on the 14th. It had gone to my spam folder and sat there for 2 weeks between a pharmacy ad and a fake invoice. The paper letter was the backstop, the redundancy, the second load path, and it had held. 2 minutes at a title officer's desk 2 years earlier, on the advice of a woman whose name I'd have to look up, had just bought me everything that came after. I didn't call anyone that night. I made a list. The fireproof box came down from the closet shelf, and I worked at the kitchen table until almost midnight with the radio off. The original recorded deed from my closing, the real one, with the recorder's stamp from 2 Aprils ago. The title insurance policy. The full closing packet, where my actual signature appears 11 times, 4 of them notarized by a notary whose commission was current and whose logbook, I'd later learn, was in perfect order. Then the exemplars, because if somebody was going to argue about my signature, I intended to bury them in my signature. 12 years of tax returns. My driver's license renewal from 2021. A passport application from 2016. My county retirement paperwork. I laid them out in date order and photographed every one with the overhead light on and the flash off, the way you document a deficient weld. Then I built a timeline on graph paper. The September phone call with the date recovered from my phone log, the October trust email, and the 11-page PDF, trustee, her, which I printed and clipped. Her 1-sentence reply, printed too. You're not going to live forever, you know, sitting there in 12-point type, looking exactly like what it was. The recording date, October 14th, 9:32 a.m. The deed's purported signing date, October 11th, and stapled to that, a receipt for a club sandwich and 26 witnesses. Somewhere after 11 o'clock, I added one more item to the box, almost as an afterthought. In May, for my son's birthday, I had signed a card, big looping signature, full name, because my wife always said a card isn't signed until it's signed properly. That card had been on the mantle in their house since May. I wrote birthday card, their possession on the graph paper, and drew a small box around it, not because I understood yet what it meant, but because 31 years had taught me to flag anything the other side controls. That little box on the graph paper turned out to be the whole case. I just didn't know it yet. I slept badly in the way you sleep before a bridge inspection when you already suspect what you're going to find. I was up at 4:40, in the truck by 7:10, and standing outside the sheriff's annex in the county seat at 5 minutes to 8 with a folder under my arm, labeled in block capitals the way I'd label any inspection file, waiting for the doors to be unlocked. The fraud unit was a small office on the 2nd floor. 2 desks, 1 window, a coffee maker doing its best. The investigator was a woman woman about my son's age, gray blazer, reading glasses pushed up in her hair, with a handshake like a door latch and a manner that did not waste anything. She let me talk for 10 minutes without interrupting, which told me she was good at her job. People who interrupt are checking your story against their template. People who wait are building the template off you. I went through it in order: the cabin, the September ask, the October trust, the silence, the letter, the deed, the lunch receipt, and slid each document across the desk as it came up in the account. She squared them as they arrived. She had a way of squaring papers that I trusted before I trusted anything she said. When I finished, she asked 3 questions, in an order I have thought about many times since. Who benefits from this document? Who has access to your signature, your house, your mail, your papers? And the third one: does anyone connected to this work in real estate, title, escrow, or lending? I said my daughter-in-law was a licensed real estate agent, and that before that she'd spent 4 years on the front desk of a title company, walking documents to the recorder's office as part of her job. The investigator stopped writing. She looked up at me over the reading glasses. Front desk of a title company, she repeated. So she knows exactly what gets checked at recording and exactly what doesn't. I said I suppose she did. For the record, the investigator said, almost gently, the answer is nearly nothing. Recorders aren't detectives. If the formatting is right and the fee is paid, it gets stamped. The system runs on the assumption that nobody would dare. Most years, that assumption holds. She photographed everything, kept the copies I'd made, and asked me to email her the trust PDF and the 1-sentence reply the moment I got home. Then she asked whether anyone had announced plans to actually occupy the property. Not yet, I said. They will, she said. Paper is step 1. Possession is step 2. A recorded deed is a tool, and nobody forges a tool they don't intend to use. When they move toward possession, a call, a date, a moving truck, that's when this stops being a document case and becomes a theft case, and the charges get a great deal heavier. If anyone contacts you about that property, write down every word with the date and time. I told her writing things down with the date and time was the one part of this I was overqualified for. She almost smiled. Give me a week, she said. She called 4 days later at 4:10 on a Friday afternoon, and she talked for 11 minutes while I stood at my kitchen counter taking notes on the back of the seed catalog because the graph paper was across the room and I wasn't going to ask her to wait. Item 1. The notary. The stamp on the forged deed belonged to a real commission, expired March of 2019. The notary herself was 71 years old, retired, living 3 counties away, and very much surprised to get a phone call. Her old stamp had gone missing years ago, around the time the title office she contracted with shut its doors and its storage unit got cleaned out by persons unimaginative about other people's property. Her logbook, the journal where a notary records every act, had been in a kitchen drawer the whole time. The last entry was March of 2019. There was, needless to say, no entry for my deed. The same title office, the investigator added, evenly, where your daughter-in-law worked the front desk. Item 2. The signature. Their document examiner had compared the deed against my 12 years of exemplars, and it failed on 11 points. Pen lifts where I don't lift, pressure where I don't press, a hesitation in the first letter where I have never once hesitated. But that wasn't the part that ended all doubt. The part that ended all doubt was the exemplar it matched, because it did match one exactly. Stroke for stroke, length for length, angle for angle, indistinguishable under the overlay. The birthday card, from May, from their mantle. No human being signs their name identically twice, the investigator said. Not once in a lifetime. An exact match isn't your signature. An exact match is a tracing of your signature. She kept the source document in her own house, and she gave us the proof by being too careful. Item 3. What it added up to. Forgery of a deed, a felony. Offering a false instrument for recording, a felony. And the moment anyone acted on that paper to take the property, attempted theft of real property stacked on top, which in this state, at this dollar value, is the kind of charge that reorganizes a person's entire life. Then came the instruction, and her voice changed for it, slowed down, the way mine used to when I got to the load limits on a report. Here's what I need from you, and it will be the hardest part. We need an overt act toward possession, a date, a demand, a truck. If she learns we're looking before that happens, the stamp goes into a lake. The story becomes a misunderstanding about estate planning, and her parents become her defense instead of her victims. So you say nothing. Not to her. Not to your son. You sit at whatever dinners you have to sit at, and you let her believe she has already won. Can you do that? I looked out my kitchen window at the bare maple in the yard, and I thought about every concrete pour I'd ever signed off on, how the whole job is doing nothing precisely on a schedule while the thing cures. 28 days, no shortcuts, no poking it to see how it's coming along. I've spent my whole life waiting on concrete, I told her. I can wait on this. Good, she said. Then, before she hung up, for what it's worth, most people can't. What followed were the strangest weeks of my life, and I include the weeks I spent crawling the underside of a flood-damaged bridge in a harness. There were 3 Sunday dinners between that phone call and the end, and I attended 2 of them, and I can account for every minute. The first was pot roast at their house. She was expansive that night, bright as a showroom. Twice, she referred to the lake place in front of me. Once to my son, once on the phone to her sister, with her voice pitched carefully for the whole room to hear. Her parents were so excited, she said. They were thinking about a new ladder for the dock. I ate my pot roast. I complimented the carrots. I passed the potatoes when my grandson asked for them, and the 7-year-old took the bowl bowl with both hands, very serious about the responsibility, and for one clean moment, I was just a grandfather at a table. That night, I sat in my truck in my own driveway and wrote it all down before I went inside. 6:42 p.m., her exact words, who was present. The log was 4 pages by then. It would reach 11. The second Sunday was pie, and the pie came with a question. She set a slice in front of me, sat down across the table, and asked, pleasantly, the way you'd ask about somebody's weekend plans, when I'd be clearing my things out of the cabin. Her parents wanted to get the painting done before the deep cold set in, she said. Her mother had picked colors. The room went very still in a way that only I seemed to be able to hear. My son studied his plate like there was a load rating printed on the rim of it. And I looked at this woman who had traced my name onto a deed with a dead stamp, and I felt the sentence rise in me. The whole 11-minute phone call, the logbook, the overlay, the word felony, and I took that sentence and I set it down. The way you set down something heavy, with your knees and not your back. Soon, I said. She smiled like a closing date. Under the table, my grandsons were running toy cars over the tops of my boots, making small engine noises, 4 and 7 years old, the only 2 people in that house being completely honest. I finished my pie. I have eaten pie under a lot of conditions in my life. That slice took more out of me than any of them. The third Sunday, I excused myself with a head cold I did not have, because I had begun to worry, genuinely, about my own face. 31 years of poker-facing contractors who lied to me about rebar, and one woman with a pie server was getting closer to breaking me than any of them ever had. The investigator called every few days. Anything? Not yet. It's coming, she said. People who steal houses are never patient about living in them. The paper isn't the prize. Standing in the kitchen like they own it, that's the prize. She'll reach for it before the snow flies. She was right by 9 days. The call I didn't expect came on a Tuesday at 7:20 in the evening, and it was her father. He was friendly as a porch swing, the way he always is, and he had practical questions. The questions of a man who has maintained things his whole life. How did the water system handle deep cold? Was there heat tape on the intake line? Could the wood stove keep the loft warm overnight, or should they bring the space heater? What kind of shape was the dock in for a man with a bad hip and opinions about ladders? And then while I stood there with the phone against my ear and my pen already moving, he said the sentence that rearranged the entire thing for me. We want you to know what this means to us, he said. She told us it was your idea, that you're downsizing, and you wanted the place kept in the family instead of sold to strangers. Not everybody would do something like that. I've been telling everyone at church about it. They didn't know. I had been assuming, somewhere underneath everything, some version of a family conspiracy, the 4 of them around a table dividing my porch. And the truth was worse and sadder than that. These 2 decent people weren't co-conspirators. They were cargo. Their daughter had forged my name, recorded the theft, and then gift-wrapped it and handed it to her own parents as evidence of my generosity. They were out there telling people at church about me. I answered every question accurately because he deserved accurate answers and because anything else would have been a signal. Yes, heat tape on the intake, installed 2 falls ago. The stove will hold the loft at 65 if you load it right before bed. I told him the trick with the damper. The dock has 1 loose board, 3rd from the end. I keep meaning to get to it. He laughed and said he'd bring his drill. He said maybe we could fish in the spring, the 2 of us. Maybe so, I said. I wrote down the date, the time, and every word, and then I sat at my kitchen table with the sick weight of it for a long while. In the morning, I called the investigator and asked the question straight. These people are about to drive their lives into a wall their daughter built. Shouldn't somebody warn them? If you warn them, you warn her, the investigator said, not unkindly. Within an hour of that conversation, the stamp is gone. The story changes, and the only people punished are the honest ones. They're not in legal danger. They're victims, and we'll treat them that way. 2 more weeks, maybe less. It is a particular kind of awful, being warm to a man on the telephone while you are holding in your other hand the schedule for the worst day of his life. The end came fast, the way these things do, slowly, and then all on one Friday. The investigator called at 3:40 in the afternoon. The warrant was signed. The detective who'd carry it was a property crimes man, 15 years in, and there would be a deputy along for civil standby. The recorder's office had flagged the fraudulent deed in their system pending the court order that would void it. Everything was in position except the date, and the date belonged to my daughter-in-law. What do I do? I asked. Nothing, she said. You've done your part. Now the paper does the work. You can be there if you want to be. Stay back, stay quiet, and let it happen. And, she added, if anything moves tonight, forward it to me immediately, whatever the hour. Something moved at 8:12 p.m. My phone buzzed on the arm of the chair, and it was a text from my daughter-in-law. No greeting. A list. An actual formatted list with bullet points, because she is nothing if not organized, of what I would be allowed to take from the cabin. The green recliner, my tools, personal photographs, clothing, and toiletries. And then the last line, the one I have read more times than any other sentence ever sent to me. Appliances stay with the house. The house. With the house. 14 months of my life and $284,500 of midnight callouts, and I was being granted the recliner. I read it twice. I did not reply. I screenshotted it and forwarded it to the investigator, and her answer came back in under a minute. 1 word long. Perfect. Because that text was the overt act with a timestamp on it. Possession. Asserted in writing, with her name attached, 11 hours before the truck. She had spent her whole campaign being careful with paper, and at 8:12 on the last night, she put the theft in a text message because she could not resist the closing. I didn't pack a box. I didn't move so much as a coffee cup. I laid out my clothes for the morning the way I used to the night before a bridge inspection. Boots by the door, coat on the hook, the folder on the table, and I went to bed in the quiet house my wife and I paid off, and I slept better than I had in a month, which tells you something about what certainty is worth. Saturday came up hard and clear, frost on the windshield, the kind of December morning where the cold has a sound to it. I was on the road north by 7:30 with the heater ticking and my hands at 10 and 2, and I drove the speed limit the whole way, which I mentioned because I was aware of it at the time, aware of doing every single thing correctly, the way you are on inspection days. I parked on the shoulder of the access road at 8:15 and walked the last quarter mile in through the trees, boots crunching on frozen mud because I didn't want my truck to be the first thing anybody saw when they turned in. The lake, through the trunks, was flat as poured concrete and the same gray as the sky. The detective's unmarked SUV sat in my driveway next to a deputy's cruiser, and the two men stood on my porch with a steel thermos on the rail between them, unhurried in a way that I found deeply settling. Men who have done a thing many times stand differently while they wait to do it. The detective shook my hand. He was a property crimes man with 15 years in and a handshake that confirmed it. He went over the choreography once, briefly. He'd make contact, confirm identity, execute the warrant. The deputy would handle standby. And I, he said this kindly, was mostly a spectator today. Stand by the porch, say as little as comes naturally. I can do quiet, I told him. So we waited. 25 minutes. Chickadees worked the feeder I'd hung by the woodshed. Nobody said much. At one point, the deputy nodded out at the water and said it must be something in summer, and I said it was something in every season, and that was the whole conversation, and it was somehow exactly enough. At 8:54, the moving van turned in off the road. It was yellow and enormous and entirely too much truck for the job, branches dragging along the top of the box as it came up the drive. Behind it came her SUV. The van's doors opened, and her parents climbed down from the cab first, her father in his good coat, holding a printed copy of the deed in a clear plastic sleeve, carrying it flat across both hands like a golden ticket. Her mother came around the front of the van with a houseplant hugged to her chest, a pothos, its leaves trembling with her steps. My daughter-in-law got out of the SUV with a folder of paperwork and her listing appointment posture on, and my son came last, lifting a box out of the back seat. Curtains, I could see the rod brackets poking up, and balancing it on his hip the way he used to carry his own kids. Her father spotted the cruiser, and he did something I will carry for the rest of my life. He gave the deputy a small, friendly, slightly confused wave, the wave you give a neighbor who has stopped by to say hello. The four of them came up the walk together, the van idling behind them, and they made it exactly as far as the front steps. The detective came down off the porch to meet them, easy as a man crossing his own yard, and asked my daughter-in-law to confirm her name. She did, with the folder hugged to her chest, and you could see her placing him, county, official, solvable, and reaching for the smile she uses on appraisers. Then he held up the warrant and read the charges out loud, in the flat weather report voice they must teach somewhere. Forgery of a deed, offering a false instrument for recording, attempted theft of real property. The words went across that frozen yard one at a time, and nothing that happened afterward happened all at once. It happened in order, like a structure coming down, member by member, each failure loading the next. Her father read the first page over the detective's arm, and his hands began to shake, the plastic sleeve with the deed in it rattling like a storm window in wind. He turned to his daughter and asked, very quietly, in the voice of a man who has never once needed to ask it before, "What did you do?" She opened the folder, as if the answer were filed in there. It wasn't. Whatever was in that folder, copies, schedules, paint colors, none of it spoke. For the first time since I have known her, she had paperwork in her hands, and the paperwork was on the other side. Her mother started in about a mistake. There's been some mistake. We signed papers. Everything was, and then she looked at her daughter's face. Really looked, and she stopped, mid-sentence, with one hand still raised in the air, holding up a word that was never going to arrive. My son set the box of curtains down on the gravel. He did it with a terrible gentleness, the way people handle objects when the world is breaking, and then he straightened up and stared at his wife like a stranger had been wearing her coat for 8 years. They handcuffed her beside the moving van while the two movers stood frozen in the open box of the truck, holding a sofa between them, not putting it down, as if setting it down would make any of this official. The deputy's voice ran through the rights, level and unhurried. She didn't cry. I'll give her that much. She didn't cry. She looked at me exactly once across the yard, and I watched the model she'd built of me fail under load in real time, every assumption she had carried into my kitchen shearing off at the bolts at once. The argue-lose-fold man, the vending machine. He wasn't here. He had never been here. Her father lowered himself onto my porch steps, and put his head in his hands, the deed in its plastic sleeve hanging from his fingers. "Nobody told us," he said, to the boards. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry you drove out here." The cruiser left first. The movers reloaded the sofa in a silence you could have framed, and the great yellow van backed down my driveway, taking branches with it the whole way, charged in full for the day either way, as I later learned, $1,180. My son drove her parents home. He didn't say one word to me, not out of anger, I understood even then, but because there were no words in him. He had the face of a man doing arithmetic that wouldn't come out. Her mother stood in the driveway until the last moment, the pothos still in her arms, and asked nobody in particular how this happened. hand. Then she set the plant down on the gravel, very carefully, as if it belonged to the house now, and got in the car. I unlocked my own front door with my own key. I put the kettle on the stove. My hands were steady right up until they weren't, and then I stood at the kitchen window and let it come, all 5 weeks of it, while the lake sat there flat and gray and entirely, legally, permanently mine. The machinery ground on without needing me. Arraignment on Monday, released on bond. The court voided the forged deed by order, and the recorder's office mailed me a corrected notice that I filed in the folder as the last page of the inspection file. In March, she pleaded guilty to felony forgery, and the other counts folded into the deal. 3 years deferred, 200 hours, restitution. To me, for the legal costs, and to her own parents, $6,200, which was the loan her father had quietly taken against his truck to pay for the move, and a new dock ladder he'd already bought. The state board revoked her real estate license. Of everything, I believe that one landed hardest. The plaques came down off a wall I've never seen. Her father drove up alone in January in 18-degree air and stood on my porch with his hat actually in his hands. He tried to give me a $100 bill for the trouble. I made him put it away and poured him coffee instead, and we sat out in the cold in our coats, and he told me about 34 years of propane roots, and finally he said, "She told us you offered." "I know she did," I said. "We left it there. The dock board, third from the end, isn't loose anymore. He brought his drill in the spring like he said he would. He's welcome on that lake for the rest of his life, and he knows it." My son went 12 days without a word, and then he called, and I let it ring once before I answered. He said he should have asked one question, any question at any point, and hadn't, because not asking was easier. Easier was his word. Before we hung up, he found a harder one. Cowardly. He said it about himself, unprompted, which is the only way that word ever does anybody any good. Things between us aren't repaired, they're open. A door that was stuck is now just closed, and a man can work with that. In June, he brought the boys up alone. The 7-year-old caught a smallmouth off the dock and held it up like he'd raised it from a calf. The 4-year-old fell asleep in the rowboat with one hand trailing in the water, and I rowed slow so as not to wake him. We grilled. The lake went pink, then silver, then dark. 31 years taught me exactly one thing worth engraving. A structure either holds the load or it doesn't. There is no partial credit. Not in bridges, not in signatures, not in the word no. She bet everything on a version of me that would fold, and all I did, in the end, was decline to be him. That night, I locked my front door with my own key, the way I do every night now, and stood for a second to listen to it. One small steel click. It held.